Hi friends, in this session we are going to discuss about the entity sets. We have already gone through many topics in database management system. If you hadn't seen my DBMS playlist, please go through it. And if you like the video, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel. Here, today we are going to discuss about the entity sets. We had already gone through the topic entities. Entities are nothing but the which are existing in the real world or non-living, that may be are living or non-living. Now today we are going to see about the entity sets. An entity refers to any object having, and it says that entity should have these two properties. What are that? Either a physical existence such as particular person, office, house or car, or a conceptual existence such as school, a university, a company, or a job. That is, it should either have a physical existence or a conceptual existence. Conceptual existence is based on the logic, whereas the physical existence is based on the infrastructure of the particular component. And if the some component satisfies the either physical or conceptual existence, then it can be termed as an entity. Next, in ER diagrams, attributes are associated with an entity set. So attributes are nothing but the properties which defines an entity. These are associated with the entity set. Next, attributes describe the properties of the entities in the entity set. So these attributes, what they'll say is they tell the what are the properties of these entities, how they belong to these how these attributes belong to these entities. These can be clarily seen in the entity set as well. Based on the values of certain attributes, an entity can be identified uniquely. So the values which will be given to the attributes of an entity will give us a identified which will give us a unique values. As we have already seen, there will be uniquely identifying values for an each entity. This is the point that says clarity about that. And there are two types of entity sets: weak entity set and strong entity sets. Let's see what are these sets. Strong entity set. A strong entity set is an entity set that contains sufficient attributes to uniquely identify all its entities. What is this term sufficient attributes to uniquely identify all its entities is? So if I define a entity, just like student. Student is an entity. It will define all the properties like name, roll number, age, everything. So it's a sufficient entity, sufficient attribute to define all the properties of certain entity. So these student entity can be clearly identified by these sort of attributes, which are clearly sufficient, and there is no need to add more attributes here. Then we have primary key exists for here. So in strong entity set we can able to see primary key values as well, then represented by underlining it. So these primary key values are represented by underlining it. Suppose there is a student entity. In student entity, suppose we have roll number, name, and then we have age. A name can be subdivided into composite attributes, whereas age can vary from 1 year to another year. But the roll number of the student can't be can be identified uniquely for a student. That is, it can't be changed, and it is single for a single person. So these can become a primary key, and it can be represented by underlining it. The primary key is nothing but a attribute which uniquely identifies the entity. Okay. So in the strong entity set, we use some symbols. What are these symbols and what they represent? Now let's see. A single rectangle is used for representing a strong entity set. So, as we have already seen, rectangle is used to represent an entity where this rectangle also can be termed as a strong entity set. A diamond symbol is used for representing the relationship that exists between two strong entities. So, as we have already seen in the before classes, two entities are maintained in a relationship. In the relationship is represented in a diamond shape, and this relationship is here. This relationship is maintained between two strong entities. Strong entity is nothing but a regular entity, whereas the weak entity is nothing but a entity with no not having any primary key values. Okay. Next, a single line is used for representing the connection of the strong entity set with the relationship set. So they, as we have already seen, the single line represents the connection, and then a double line is used for representing the total participation of an entity set with the relationship set. Next, total participation may or may not exist in a relationship. What is this total participation? What is as we, now in the further classes we will see what is this total participation and partial participation as well. This total participation means the entity will depend totally on this relation. So let's see with an example. Here, student has a two student entity and course entity are given, and between them enrolled in is a relationship, and student has two attributes, that is student ID and student name, whereas course has course ID and course name. These student in has as we here we can see double lines are represented. Above we had already seen double line is used for representing total participation. So whereas a single line is used for partial participation. What is this double line represents is it represents total participation. Total participation, that is student should participate in at least one course. Okay, student should enroll in at least one course, but the enrollment can be on any course. Understood? Student should enroll the course, but the enrollment can be of any course. In this way, we can represent the total participation as well as participation in the relationships as well in a entity sets. Now we are going to see about weak entity sets. A weak entity set is an entity set that doesn't contain sufficient attributes to uniquely identify its entities. As we have already discussed in entities, weak entities are the one which won't identify the relation uniquely. That is, it won't have any primary key values, and weak entity set is nothing but this set of weak entity sets, that is the total uh, category of entity sets which doesn't have any primary key value, and primary key doesn't exist for weak entities. This point we have already discussed. It contains a partial key called as discriminator. So weak entities will have a partial key known as discriminator. We will understand this discriminator with an example. Discriminator can identify a group of entities from the entity set. So what this discriminator do is it will identify a group of entities, that is it will identify a set of entities with your just like in the place of primary key, it identifies the entities in the form of discriminator, that is a partial key. Next, discriminator is represented by underlining a dashed line. Dashed line in the sense like giving gaps to each and every underscore, and discriminator is the one which replaces the primary key in the weak entity set. The combination of discriminator and primary key of the strong entity set make it possible to uniquely identify all entities of the weak entity set. As we have already seen, weak entity set won't have any primary key value, so it can't uniquely identify the relation. But when this discriminator of the weak entity and the primary key of the strong entity in a relation combines, then they can uniquely identify all entities of the weak entity set. Thus, this combination serves as a primary key for the weak entity set. So the combination of the discriminator and plus the primary key of the strong entity set represents as a primary key for the weak entity set. Clearly, this primary key is not formed by the weak entity set completely. So the primary here we are borrowing this primary key from the strong entity set with the help of this discriminator. That is, discriminator plus primary key of the strong entity makes it a uniquely identifying weak entity set. So here primary key is not formed with the weak entity set completely. It is formed by the primary key of the strong entity set. In here, this represents the overall description of the above sentences. Primary key of the weak entity set is equals to its own discriminator plus primary key of the strong entity set. Next, we'll see some of the symbols used in this weak entity set. A double rectangle is used for representing a weak entity set. To represent, as we have already seen, weak entities are represented in a double rectangle, and these weak entity sets are also represented in a double rectangle. A double diamond symbol is used for representing a relationship that exists between the strong and weak entity sets, and this relationship is known as identifying relationship. One, as we have already seen in the previous classes, relationship can also be represented in a diamond shape, whereas the relationship between the strong entity and the weak entity can be represented in a double diamond shape, and these double diamond shape representation can be known as identifying relationship. And a double line is used for representing the connection of the weak entity set with the relationship set. Next, total participation always exists in the identifying relationship. Identifying relationship in the sense a relationship formed between the strong and weak entity sets, whereas there always be a total participation that exists between these identifying relationships. What is this total participation? In strong entity sets, we have already seen total participation can be represented by double lines, whereas single partial participation can be represented in a single line. In the below example, here building is highly dependent on the building base and apartment. Here building and the apartment are the two entities, where building is a strong entity whereas apartment is a weak entity. And here it has three attributes like a building number, building name and address. And here apartment has two attributes, that is door number and the floor. As here we can see, for apartment is a weak entity, so it has a discriminator. We here discriminator is considered with a dashed symbol. Here we are considering door number as a discriminator, as it a little uniquely identifies the weak entity sets. And building has the primary key value, that is building number. So here for this weak entity set, we have to find the primary key value. As we have already seen the formula, primary key of the weak entity set is equals to its own discriminator plus primary key of the strong entity sets. So for the above example, here we can see primary key of the apartment is equals to, that is primary key of the weak entity set is equals to primary key of a strong entity set, that is building. So primary key of the building is building number. So building number plus its own discriminator. What is the discriminator that we can able to see here is door number. So plus door number. By this we can find the primary key value of the strong weak entity set. This is all about entity sets. In further DBMS sections, we are going to discuss more topics in this DBMS. So if you hadn't gone through my DBMS playlist, please go through it, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel. It get motivated me to do more videos on this topic. And thank you once again.